morning, everybody. Welcome to the Cape Cod Technology Council's first Friday for November. I'm Bert Jackson, CEO. Welcome you all here today. Really excited to have Justin Grammens here, and we'll get to that in a moment. I want to thank our First Friday series sponsor, OpenCape. They've been a sponsor for us for quite some time, and we do appreciate that. We're going to move right along, and I'm going to introduce Ed Klein from Cape Cod Healthcare, who's going to be moderator today. So Ed, are you ready to go?
Thank you. Good morning, Bert. And welcome to Justin. We're really excited to have him with us and thankful, as Bert mentioned, he's beaming in from the great state of Minnesota. So just a programming note as usual, take questions in the chat. And as we go along, if Justin wants to break, we can take a few questions, or we can certainly get those addressed at the end. I just want to say I first became aware of Justin's work about 5 or 6 years ago when I subscribed to his newsletter, the IoT News, and I really found it to be a fabulous source of information. He's updated it to be the artificial intelligence and IoT news, so it's now AIoT. He really does a great job of curating news stories top to bottom, so he takes a topic all the way from embedded hardware and software up through the stack to machine learning and data analytics. And he does a nice cross section of consumer appliances and businesses. So really a terrific source of information. So Justin's got his contact information at the end. If I certainly encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter. And best of all, it's free. And they do take sponsors as well. So if anybody's out looking to get connected with the community, it's a great sponsorship opportunity. But Justin's a successful entrepreneur. He's been the founder or co-founder of a number of different companies. As Bert mentioned, he continues to run Lab651, which I know we'll hear more about. But he also, in his spare time, volunteers and offers a lot of other opportunities. He's an adjunct professor at a local university. He's also co-founder of a group called Emerging Technologies North, which is a nonprofit which helps communities and startups and offers a bunch of STEM initiatives. So really, like I said, a busy guy. We're really fortunate to have him and looking forward to what he has to say. Justin holds I'll mention he also holds a bachelor's degree in applied math and physics from Augsburg College and a master's of software systems from the University of St. Thomas, which is where he serves on the adjunct faculty. So really hope you enjoy the presentation on the intersection of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. So Justin, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. All right, great. Thanks, Bert, and thanks, Ed. I very much appreciate everyone being here today and the opportunity to be invited to speak to everyone at the Cape Cod Technology Council. Let me try and share my screen here real quick, and we can get started. And all right, hopefully everyone can see the slides here on the screen. So as Ed mentioned, my name is Justin Grammens. I'm the founder of a company called Lab651. 651 is the area code in St. Paul, Minnesota here. So it's 1 hour earlier for me, but I'm usually up early. I have a lot of different things going on. And so as I said, thank you so much for the opportunity. Today, I'll be speaking about the artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. There's a new sort of term that's coming around. It's called AIoT, if you haven't heard about it. And that's kind of where this talk is going to be sort of focusing around, is this idea of the overlap of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. So what are we going to cover today? I've got 30, 40 minutes or so here. I just want to talk a little bit about who I am. Ed touched a little bit on like my resume. Want to define what the Internet of Things is, what artificial intelligence is, and sort of what AIoT is. I believe it's going to change our lives. There's lots of things that we've been seeing going on with new technology, new and emerging technology, and this is sort of a more and more I guess an amplification of what's happening as these technologies begin to merge. So it's going to change our lives going forward. I also like to talk a lot about applications, and one of the groups that I formed here in the Twin Cities is called AppliedAI, and I want to go through a series of business applications and use cases of businesses that we've worked with and projects we worked on here at Lab651, and also maybe to step back at the end and say, how do I get started in this space? I know probably a number of you are involved in organizations, maybe thinking about using new technology, maybe own a business, and kind of walk you through maybe just a quick sort of just, I guess, a checklist of how we work with companies at Lab651. And then we'll have some good discussion and Q&A at the end. So just briefly, as I mentioned, I'm the founder of a company called Lab651. We build smart, connected products. And the smart focuses on the artificial intelligence, and the connected aspect focuses on the Internet of Things. I also have another company where we apply machine learning and AI specifically to Internet of Things data called Recursive Awesome. As Ed mentioned, I do have a weekly newsletter. It's called IoT Weekly News. If you Google for that, you'll find it right away. And we're focusing a lot on Internet of Things, but also folding in a lot of stuff with artificial intelligence. I have a podcast too called Conversations on Applied AI. So if you have a chance to subscribe to that, it's on all the favorite podcasting channels. Please take a look at that. I also try and teach when I can at the University of St. Thomas, and then I have a nonprofit and focusing on just general and broad emerging technologies. And we also do a fair amount of work in applied artificial intelligence, and we have a meetup where our group gets together every month. So if you check out AppliedAI.mn, we do very similar things where every month we get together and we have an online Zoom meeting, and everybody we have presenters and we talk about artificial intelligence. So just to sort of set the stage here, what is the Internet of Things? And if you take a look at Wikipedia, it sort of describes it as a network of physical objects. And I've been living in this IoT space for more than a decade. And the focus really on Internet of Things is really there's these things that are out there that have embedded technology inside them, and they have sensors and software, and the purpose of them is really to connect to the internet and exchange data, right? So nothing in this description really talks about intelligence or smarts. It's like, okay, look, we have these things in the field, and we want to be able to get more and more information off of them. And if you sort of contrast that with what is artificial intelligence, it's really intelligence, right? That's the focus of this, demonstrated by machines. And there's this whole other side of AI where we can talk about, consciousness and emotionality and stuff like that. But, we're not going to go there. We're really going to talk about machines sort of demonstrating intelligence. So as I sort of think about what is the artificial intelligence of things, and this is taken from Wikipedia as well, it's become more and more of a common term in our industry. It's basically, as I was saying before, more the combination of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things infrastructure to achieve more efficient IoT operations and then improve that human-machine interactions, right? So take something, for example, like Alexa or Google Home, right? Those are things that you can now speak to and have very, conversations with, and you can have these more or less human-machine-like interactions with it. So that's a great example of something that would be known as an AIoT device in the field. And I think I'll touch on it too, but you can sort of think about artificial intelligence as the brains of the operation and more IoT as the nervous system, right? If you were to take a look at, kind of contrasting it to the human body. So if you think back to your math class, right, and you have this sort of Venn diagram of where things overlap, the Internet of Things really applies to these connected products, but as I was saying earlier, it misses the point on the intelligence side. And as the AI is defined as intelligence demonstrated by machines, but it also needs sensing, computation, voice, and vision to provide any value. So, artificial intelligence and machine learning, deep learning, all these new technologies can work with a lot of data that maybe is already stored in a database or is, based upon somebody's clicks on a website. It really misses the physical aspect, right? What Internet of Things brings to that is data from the physical world. And how does it do that? It does that through cameras, it does that through microphones, it does that through sensors out in the field, but it's really that overlap of the physical world and the digital world coming together and providing intelligence. And so, I'm not the only one who thinks AIoT is important. Back in May of this year, Forbes said it promises to be one of the most exciting technology developments we've ever experienced. It's likely to become a $3 trillion industry by 2024. And that's not that far away, right? We're almost into 2022 here. And I am personally seeing a lot of momentum and a lot of conversation going on with companies that I would say historically have captured data, but maybe haven't really thought through how they were going to use that data and how they could most effectively make that data affect their customers and be much more intelligent and much more, as I said, more human digestible and interactive. The other reason as to why it's important is a couple of these points that I wanted to make, where you can have intelligence both in a server farm somewhere, but we're seeing more and more of it getting pushed out to the device itself, right? And why is that important? Well, there's this big idea of security, right? People don't know where their data is going, and people would love to know that my data isn't going anywhere. And so if that information is not leaving this device, there's no opportunity for it to be, I guess, in some ways misused, right? So the security question is just kind of off the table when people start asking about, okay, how is this device going to like how is this device going to react to the field? You can actually make these devices be more smarter at the edge. So, think about a self-driving car, for example. Those are situations where data, it can be resident on the device. It can make very quick decisions, and the data is never actually shared with a backend system, right? So you have increased security sort of built in. You also have this great idea of less bandwidth and cloud computation needed. So when you start distributing the intelligence throughout all these devices that are out in the field, you quickly realize that A, it's more efficient because it's better just to have computations and information being processed on the device itself, because it saves you a lot of work if you're maintaining the server farm. And you also have less bandwidth that's needed. So we're working with a company right now that is in basically far Western Australia in very, very dry areas. And we are doing soil moisture sampling with them with a device that we built that gets essentially put into the ground, and it measures with regards to moisture. And so they do not want to send much data up to the cloud. They actually want to have the system be able to react in time with regards to turning on irrigation systems and not. It's very expensive for them to basically be able to send data and have this thing react. So we can send intelligence down to these devices, and these devices can do very complex and sophisticated things, but we can use very little bandwidth for that. We might only have to check in once every day or so. Whereas if you were thinking about, other types of solutions, somebody might build something to always connect to the cloud. Well, that is very expensive when it comes to cellular connectivity, and some of these frequency bands actually cost money to use. So it's really, really important to start thinking about the Internet of Things and pushing this intelligence down to the edge. We can also make nearly instantaneous decisions. So as I mentioned with regards to the self-driving car and stuff like that, Tesla, they're not asking the server, what should I do? They're going to be making decisions as needed. So that's why it's really important to start having this intelligence at the edge. And as I was talking about with regards to the water and the system in Australia, these systems can exist nearly anywhere. So they can even exist in offline scenarios. So this thing could be not connected, for example, and still be able to make decisions and not be so reliant upon, a server. So really, really interesting way with regards to how we're going to start seeing these IoT devices get smarter and smarter. And at the end here, I said, while IoT is reactive, AIoT can be thought of as proactive. And as I get into my examples here, I'm going to sort of highlight some of these solutions that we built for companies and where they are proactive. Quickly, just going to define what proactive means, right? So creating or controlling a situation by causing something to happen rather than responding to it after it has happened. And oftentimes you'll see data being collected for the sake of collecting data, but you're not actually controlling, or the other word is actuating, the system and having it change. And so as we go through some of these examples, I'll try and highlight in blue where you're actually going to start to see, oh, great, these systems are actually now controlling a situation. And that's what I mean by getting more or less proactive. When it comes to use case categories, I was just going to kind of give an overarching view. These are sort of the 6 types of categories that we typically see customers come with. One is, asset tracking. This is, you have something out in the field, whether it be a truck, whether it be, a piece of machinery, whatever it is, an appliance, whatever it is. You might have these things out in the field, and you want to be able to track them. Typically, it's something that's moving, and so you want to know where these things are at or how they're behaving in the field. You have this whole other category of compliance. So it's really, I have something that is out in the field, but I want to make sure that it's being serviced, and I actually need to make sure that certain, from a legal standpoint, it's being checked on or it's being monitored. You have this idea of automatic replenishment, and I'll talk a lot about that in the consumer space, but this could be something as simple as maybe a appliance ordering new dishwasher detergent, which we're doing right now with one of our clients at Kenmore. So these things can start actually automatically replenishing themselves. Environmental reporting, that goes to my Australian example, right? We want to monitor things out in the field. consumer convenience. This is actually really important. Consumers are finding it really cool to be able to open up their phone and check on who came to their front door, right? Through a Ring, or a Google Home. They want to be able to check in through the security camera, or check on their appliances, or turn the heat up or down, right? These are general convenience items, but they can actually provide some really, really interesting things for customers to be able to want to control their devices. And then last but not least is preventative maintenance. And this is huge for companies. If they know when things are going to fail before they're going to fail, it's huge cost savings. And I'll touch on a couple examples in that space as well. I'll just continue, I guess, if there is any questions, I guess, Ed, feel free to jump in or ask them. But
yeah, if you want to take one, Justin, we did get one, and it's probably a good spot to take it since you're going to go through some examples. Steve Tom asked about what you had to say about edge devices and security and the benefits. So sort of a follow-up to that, if the customer data is retained in the remote device, can you offer any comments on what will limit remote data farming by the system operators, sort of that reach back and farm the data?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, some of it is just buried in sort of terms of service, I guess. And, it depends on I think there's differences between consumer applications and business applications. There's obviously nothing to say that, there couldn't be something, either your device could get hacked, for example, from an outside threat, or B, your information is going to be used against, your knowledge. This thing has to be connected to the internet in some ways, right? And so, that's the whole point is we need to be able to update the model and make these devices smarter. And as long as the data is anonymized, and these are things that I think are going to be, I think you're going to see more and more laws being passed in this specific thing, where people are going to be able to say either, I legally want you to anonymize my data, right? Or a company's going to say, we will anonymize your data, number one. Or number two, I think this is an interesting sort of side thing. I think consumers should actually charge companies to make them pay to get your data back. And I think we're still years away from that, but I think you're going to start to see people start to demand that and say, if you want my real data, whoever I am, you should pay me back for that. But yes, I do think right now it's still a little bit murky. There aren't really clear guidance on that. I would say it sort of falls under just the general internet. Like when you go to a website and you start clicking around, people know what they're doing, right? I mean, and same thing on your cell phone. You know what you're doing with your Apple device or your Android device, whatever it is. These companies do have a deep tie into it. And from my standpoint, as long as it's secure, it's transparent of what they're doing with that data, and you're okay with it and you're finding benefit in it, then I think there's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I think the key, what you said, Justin, is that transparency, that people understand it's deliberate versus it's happening behind the scenes and they're not aware of it.
Right.
I'm not sure everyone does know what they're doing, but we'll leave that at that. One other question, then we'll let you get back to it. Eileen had a follow-on, which is what about shared data that multiple staff have access to? I think it falls in line with your comments about having cloud storage. That would be an area where it's really designed. It's a different application. It's not meant to have data at the edge. She asked, how could all that shared business data be on individual devices?
Sure. So this idea of actually having a device that's actually bringing in data from multiple sources.
Yeah, she's comparing, it used to be sort of the model of in-house servers that have been replaced by cloud storage.
Sure. Yeah, and I think there's always a trade-off. Once you take it to the cloud, you obviously are now in a server farm, for example, that has other data sort of sitting right next to it. And I think there is a benefit in that. If somebody can aggregate that data and put it together in a legal, like they can legally actually access this data and aggregate it, I think there's a huge win there. Obviously, there are some concerns too with regards to moving to the cloud and understanding, again, that transparency of where your data is going to be stored at.
Right.
I think one thing I would say just off the cuff is you've seen people move to remote work. Companies that prior would lock off, like I worked with a lot of clients where they would essentially firewall off anybody from the outside in, and they had to quickly change that model if they wanted their employees to work from home and they wanted outside contractors to be able to make this happen. And I think there's a way forward, and I think there is. It just needs to be sort of thought through and done, effectively.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, well, that's great. Good couple of questions. Justin, let you get back to the applications.
Great, cool, thanks. So one of the applications that we worked on is with Kenmore. I touched on a little bit with regards to smart appliances, and some of the benefits that you may see are more efficient service calls. So quick story from my standpoint. This was some years ago, but I didn't have a smart connected refrigerator, and the ice maker stopped working, right? And so I call up the company. Person comes out, they take a look at it, they say, okay, here, I'm going to go ahead and place an order. You're going to see a box show up in about 5 to 7 days. Just set it aside, call us, and we'll come back and install it. So sure enough, 5 to 7 business days later, a box shows up. I call them, and a couple days later, the person comes back. He opens up the box, wrong part, right? So he reorders the part, leaves, new part shows up, comes back. So now he's made 3 trips to my house. It's been 2.5 weeks later, and finally I'm able to get this, ice maker working again. Whereas you'd see much more efficiency is if the refrigerator itself could actually send a new part to my house. And I joke with people, but this is going to happen. You're going to come home one day, and sitting there on your front steps is going to be, some piece for your air conditioner that's going to be that it was needed to be fixed, and you didn't even know that, right? And so it's much more efficient for parts to be delivered, on site, and a person goes out and makes a service call, right? So from Kenmore's standpoint, they're working on that entire aspect of it. They also get a lot of visibility into customer usage. So what features of the appliances are being used or not. And then what I've tried to highlight in blue here is, what are some of those things that are more proactive that we're talking about, right? So how could appliances basically be smart enough to only run when energy costs are low, or actually understand when people are not home? And this gets more into the heating and ventilation type stuff, but just, you don't even need to set your vacation stuff, you're starting to see some of the Nest things do this, but these systems can become more proactive in understanding the world around them. We actually have features now where consumables can be ordered as needed. So, maybe you need a new water filter, that can be just automatically ordered. Dishwashing, clothes washer, detergents and stuff like that can all be added. And then you can also have these systems be more intelligent and shut down to avoid damage. So maybe there's a part that is actually going to hurt the machine if it continues to run. You can have the appliances actually shut down. So those are sort of 3 examples there that are really proactive, but just a really great story around how these smart appliances are helping people get better. This is another company here in Minnesota. Actually, they're called Memphis Grills, and wanted to create a connected grill. And these are wood pellet grills. So they're cooked with wood pellets, and you can actually have the grill to turn off when certain temperatures, like the internal temperature of the meat, is reached. So you can just, some of these things, have to cook for hours, or more of a smoking type thing. And so, you don't even need to be home, and the grill is intelligent enough to figure out when it needs to stop. The automatic replenishment side. So going back, if you look on the left side, some of these use case types, I've tried to sort of tie in those 6 use case types that we talked about before, and sort of, kind of map them back to some of the benefits that we have. So automatic ordering of additional wood pellets. And then this we actually have built them an Alexa app. So you can actually do voice control. You can ask the grill what the temperature is. You can reset various probes and settings, interactive recipes, all sorts of cool stuff you can do to be able to essentially interact through your voice to your grill. So another great application of, again, pushing more smarts to the edge and having these things that are all around us now be able to be more and more interactive. This is a business application actually for a company called Eaton. They make hydraulic hoses. They've done it for 100 years. But the thinking is how could we actually make smarter hoses, right? So there's a sensor that goes on this product that they have called LifeSense, and it can actually predict and let them know failure of hoses before they fail. And when a hose fails, if a hydraulic hose fails, there's 3 problems that happen. Number 1 is there's environmental concerns, right? All this hydraulic fluid needs to be cleaned up. There's actually downtime that happens. So this might be connected to a piece of construction equipment. Now this thing is down until a new hose can be installed. And then, most importantly, there's actually humans that can be hurt that are near this hot hydraulic fluid that is spraying everywhere. So if you can predict and understand when these hoses are going to fail ahead of time, you can avoid all those 3 problems, number 1. And then number 2, Eaton itself now can sort of sell these hoses, not just as a one-time thing. We're actually selling a service now. So they're selling a monthly service to companies that want to make sure that their hoses are basically replaced before these failures occur. So it's a different business model. You're seeing companies think about this And instead of selling just a raw physical asset that anyone can make, now they're selling an intelligent service on top of it. So it's a great example of how we can start using intelligence at the edge to start predicting and actually essentially, saving people from getting hurt. I'm going to flip it back here to another consumer example that we've done work with Craftsman. They actually make smart lawnmowers. These are the riding lawnmowers, for example, but there's an application involved. There's a back end where they can see where people are using, all of their lawnmowers. You can see how things are performing. So you can get maintenance alerts. And after it's been run for so many, hours, the blade needs to be replaced. These are things that most consumers, number one, typically don't think about. So the app in your pocket can alert you and say, hey, it's time for this to happen. They can also have better interactions with their customers with, next year model promotions. They can say your battery's getting low. You might want to actually replace it now. It's not going to make it through the summer. They can start understanding where these are happening, like where people are using their products out in the field, more along the lines of location-based, marketing. And again, as a consumer, if you opt in for this, great. Now, you potentially would get a coupon for the next version. You obviously would be able to replace your blade. There's oil pressure, maintenance, and all those types of alerts come in on your phone as well. So there's some benefits there as a consumer to be able to have this one stop, like this one quick look at your device in your pocket. This is a really cool application. This is, as you probably know, I'm in Minnesota, like we said at the beginning, and we get a lot of snow, a lot of cold up here. And there's a company called Voight Smith Innovation, or VSI, and they have been making de-icing solutions, or a de-icing hardware product for many, many years. And this goes on the back of like a pickup truck, for example. And these are like large parking lots, malls, places like this where people are driving around and not only doing snow plowing, but they're also de-icing the parking lot. And so the idea was how could we make a smarter de-icer, right? And these things typically have just been more or less on or off. There's just been more or less a switch on there. I want to turn it on or I want to turn it off. Well, what if you could flip the model a little bit and essentially invoice customers? And this is from them thinking about how could we invoice customers based on liquid used, right? And so quickly became, okay, let's start making this thing be a lot more intelligent. And we have an app where from inside the cab, you can turn things up and down and control it. So it's all wireless now, which is great because prior there was no, it was a wire actually running back to the device, to the machinery sitting in the back. But then also, now they can only apply the quantity of the de-icing liquid, needed based on speed. So as you're driving around the lot, if you're going fast, there's going to be more solution coming out. If you're stopped or driving slow, it stops. Right. And so they can actually invoice customers now, not just flat rates. They know exactly how much of the solution that has been laid down, more environmentally friendly. They've got really good data now on how much is actually being used, sent to the cloud, again, all sort of stored in a database. And then what's awesome, there's the last point here around location verification. Sometimes customers, and then this goes along with the compliance thing, like they don't know when their lot was done or when it wasn't done or how long it took somebody to do it. Now they have visibility into all of that, right? They can say, your lot was plowed and de-iced from 6:30 a.m. and to basically 7:30 a.m. for example, on this specific date. Like we know from a compliance standpoint that somebody was out there doing that work, right? There was no proof of that before. So again, just all this sort of like data that is happening and all the intelligence, to bring it back to AIoT, I've highlighted in blue here some of the smarts that's going on this piece of equipment to allow it to become more environmentally friendly. This is another industrial application, similar in some ways to the prior one, but it's not actually moving around. This is a company called Radia, and they're here in Minnesota as well. They make a industrial grade paint mixer. So if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, you will likely see a Radia sort of behind the counter. And what it does is, you put the gallon of paint in there and it mixes it up. And they've been doing this for 40 years. They've been having machines to basically do this. And these are the type of applications that are really exciting, I think, from an artificial intelligence standpoint, where you take a product that has just been doing something on its own and you start thinking about, well, what if, right? What if we could start getting data on these machines that are out in the field? And again, it comes back to being able to spot issues from the device ahead of time, being able to fix them before they go down. Because oftentimes, if one of these machines go down, what's the person in the paint department doing, right? There actually is lost revenue that goes on when these machines fail. And then they can start to understand how machines are performing in the field. this is one of the things that sort of spans across a lot of these things is a lot of companies that make physical products, they ship them out, but lack of a survey, right, which are completely irrelevant. And in most cases, you have no idea how people are using the device or how it's performing in the field. Like, what are the errors that are happening that are going on? You'd have no visibility. And so what's happening is a lot of this data now, these companies need to have this visibility, and that's the IoT piece, right? And then the artificial intelligence piece now is actually flipping it back around and having these machines be able to perform different, raise error codes, call support, for example, order the parts, like do all the stuff I was talking about to actually make it be a better product. So when somebody goes to buy a paint mixer, for example, Lowe's goes to buy their next ones, there's obviously huge competition out there for a bunch of different ones, but they're going to be, this is the one that we want because we know it's going to be serviced right. So yeah, really, really cool application. This is my last one here that I will talk about. It's a company called Zergo, and they make intelligent dash cams. And you may see dash cams if you ride with an Uber driver or something like that, or maybe even just want one. I actually have one of these cameras in my car. And they're good to have, just more or less from a, if you're getting in an accident, there's all sorts of video records leading up to it. But from the standpoint of a fleet or a fleet manager, they want to understand what's going on in their trucks, in their fleets out in the field. And that's one thing to be able to check in, be able to see, location-based information. And that's what this camera is. It's essentially cellular connected. It reports back, where it is, but it also has a accelerometer on it, gyroscope. It's got dual cameras, so camera pointing forward, camera pointing back at the person. And it can start to, there's actually AI models being run on these machines, and it can start understanding when there's lane departure, right? So, everyone says, oh, I'm going to buy a Tesla because I can understand lane departure. Well, actually, these cameras will do that. They will understand if you're veering off. They will understand if you're going above the speed limit. They will understand if you're drowsy or you're distracted. So there's cameras going, like I say, both ways, and it can send alerts, either, A, wake people up, but B, also understand this was the state that the person was in as they were driving down the road. And it's a great application of, again, putting artificial intelligence at the edge to save people's lives, obviously to have better visibility into what people are doing as they're out, driving and effectively working for your business. You can get, of course, there's security aspects to it that's really good. You can do video capture and you can check out what's going on. You can be alerted when the thing moves or it goes outside of a certain area. And then what's also really cool is this actually plugs into what's called the ODB2 port, which is a common port on all modern cars, and it gets engine performance records. It can understand, how the engine is performing. And back to the Eaton example that I was talking about earlier, you can actually start setting up maintenance records and all sorts of information with regards to having the truck being serviced in the time that it needs to be serviced. So another really, great example where we've taken a camera at the edge, but then now made it even smarter, right? It's now it's able to actually, do things based on what it's seeing and what it's sensing in the field. So quick, just sort of summary from these examples. And then I'll probably pause for a second, see if there's any other questions. I do have a couple more slides here at the end. I just want to make sure we have enough time for sort of formal Q&A, but I wanted to, I just essentially sort of pulled out the words here from some of my examples, right? So run appliances when energy costs are lower or people are not home, right? That was the example from Ken Moore. Also order consumables as needed. We've got examples where we've talked about more intelligent shutdown to avoid damage, whether it be from the paint mixer, whether it be from an appliance. These machines and physical things can start to understand, I'm going to do long-term damage if I continue to operate this. I'm going to shut down. You can predict and replace hoses or whatever it is out in the field before there's actually a failure. Only apply certain de-icing liquid needed. So that was the example I talked about with VSI. Spot issues from runtime data before they occur. That was the Radia example. And then, of course, alert when drivers are distracted or drowsy. So in all of these examples, there's usually a verb involved, right? It's the system is going to do something, and that's really what the whole idea is of being proactive and sort of bringing artificial intelligence to the edge. So just like any company that blissfully ignored the internet at the turn of the century, and ones that dismiss the Internet of Things, and I would say now the artificial intelligence of things risks getting left behind. And this was a quote by Jared Newman. technology analyst, and I think he said this very recently. And I think, as you think back to when the internet started, I would say the dawn of the internet, and I'm just focusing more around maybe 20 years ago, year 2000, for example, people never really, they sort of understood it as, great, we're going to take a bunch of these brochures, because I was working at the internet back then too, and a lot of companies were thinking we're going to take paper products and put them on the internet and digitize them, and now that's all websites are. It's just basically digital versions of promotional materials that were paper. And now 20 years later, we're starting to realize is the internet's a heck of a lot more than that, right? It's the transfer of data, and now it's bleeding into our physical world, where it's a transfer of intelligence and smarts now actually showing up in all these devices that are around us. Are there any questions right now before I have like 2 more slides here before I close it out?
Yeah, we've got a couple. Yeah, we've got a couple, Justin. Thanks. And that's a great statement. It's really a competitive advantage to be able to offer these technologies. And I have the same view from about 20 years ago. A couple of questions that really get at the heart of all this technology. We're all technology enthusiasts. It's great, but there's always got to be a business case. So Eldon has a question about what price impacts are you seeing for the additional devices, and what pushback has there been around those costs?
Oh, great question. I would say it depends when you say price impacts. So, for example, a company like Radia, they actually already have sensors on the devices to capture it. And it was really sort of dumb. It went into what I would call a dumb terminal. So for us to come in there and basically take this information and essentially, hook up a gateway and capture that data and push it off to a cloud backend system, these are one-time costs that need to be set up initially, right? So you need to build out the infrastructure on the back end. But when it comes to actually new sensors, new things, like an overhaul of the product, it's not really that bad. I couldn't give you, and I'll talk about it on my next slide, where as get started as a business, I couldn't give you it's a 1% cost increase or a 200% cost increase. It really depends on the customer and their existing product, and how much you need to sort of, in some ways, either overhaul it, or it's like, oh, let's just run a wire from here to here, and now all of a sudden we can start getting this information. Yeah. And so yeah, but when it comes to pushback, that is actually a really, really good angle to view this from. I am finding that a lot of companies don't want to do this yet, and it's even the idea. I think when we saw mobile phones come out, smartphones come out, it was always like, oh, that's a neat little toy, that's a neat little device, but I'm going to wait for the next company to basically sort of get in first. And pretty soon you had this sort of leveling up, I saw where, because I was building mobile apps back when the iPhone first came out, and all of a sudden their competitions had an app, and now all of a sudden we need to get on board. And you started seeing this, this leveling going on, where companies were going in. And what I think you're going to see is some companies are really hesitant to get in there at first, but once they get in there and they start seeing it, then all of a sudden there's just a tsunami, because every other company now kind of needs to pick up their game. And I'll go back to the Memphis Grills one, for example. The biggest grill competitor out there is a company called Traeger, and they are probably the biggest one. But Traeger sort of started it, right? They started putting apps in the field. They started connecting all their grills, and Memphis Grills was like, we got to do this. I mean, there's really no question about it. People are going to go and they're going to, this is actually a feature that people want. And so I'm seeing initial pushback, I would say, and I would say mainly from companies that have sort of done it the way that they've always done it. These are companies that have always manufactured things and not really, really thought about the intelligence at the edge or the data. But once we get a proof of concept set up, I think you see a lot of converts. You see a lot of companies say, wow, this is powerful, and this is a competitive advantage that now we can leverage, and people will literally buy our product over somebody else because of it.
I agree, and that's where that business analysis comes in. Even if it is a slightly higher, the advantage is you get as a company. That's great, Justin. Another question about the notifications from these devices, and I really enjoyed what you had to say. We're seeing, sort of in that consumer model, what we've done in business for years, like at the hospital system, we've always used the proactive part shipment and analysis and have things fixed before they break.
Mm.
But Rob has a question around over notification, which is can be sort of a broad topic. Because they ignore, like a lot of us, they already ignore a lot of these, and you sort of get this like alarm fatigue type thing. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. In fact, I usually silence my phone pretty much most of the day so I can stay focused. And so, yes, a lot of these notifications can sort of go by the wayside. I think, yes, there is definitely a problem there where you can over notify either because, the system hasn't been programmed properly, and some of these systems are pretty complex, right? And so it's pretty easy for bugs to sneak into them and people to have poor experiences. How do you mitigate that? I guess, just make sure that you are being just mindful of how your consumers are using the product, trying to find those things sooner rather than later. I think some of the other things too is of course, allow people an opt-out strategy. That should just be sort of like known by now, is people should be able to always, I feel, just be able to opt out of either data privacy concerns, basically say, I don't want my data to go anywhere. But then also, yeah, I do not want to be notified, or I want to check in on the device when I feel like it makes sense. So these are things that I think you should always build into your product, thinking more from the user experience standpoint of, let them check in on whenever they want. Or maybe it's an email that's a summary at the end of every week, right? It's you don't need to get hit every hour on this stuff. It's just, so have these alternatives for people to be notified if they would like to, through whatever channel they think is the most important.
Yeah, I agree that it's good design, and then those user interface basics around offering affordances and not making it overly complex, but giving them what they need. A couple more, and then I'll let you get back to the presentation, Justin. There's a question, you heard when we were chatting, getting the equipment and getting your presentation set up about the nor'easter we had came through the Cape last week. So there's a timely question around, do you have any knowledge from Eldon, a question around knowledge of electric utilities using technologies like this to track outages and also to expedite repairs?
Sure. Well, I mean, most power companies have a lot of this stuff in place, surprisingly. They're usually pretty antiquated. But power outage will happen somewhere, and they are alerted to it. I think some of the more smarts we can build that consumers could have within their home, to me, is sort of very interesting. And even ideas around, I'm thinking completely like off the cuff here, but there is this whole idea of the smart grid, right? And the smart grid is not only, of course, understanding where failures are happening, either potentially ahead of time, right? Because there's failures that can happen, and then on top of that, failures can build up. And I know companies are working. We have our company here is Excel, and we actually have talked to them on a couple different things with regards to when a particular failure happens, what other failures is that going to lead to? But the smart grid actually is this idea of having these things self-heal, right? So maybe somebody doesn't have power today, but they could actually sell their power back to a place that once power comes back online, then they actually have an abundance of power to then feed all these other people as they come back online. So I'm by no means an expert at all in this field. But I mean, I do know that power companies are looking at making the grid more and more efficient, and playing out models with regards to when these customers go down, what does that mean for the overall grid? And then having it be self-healing, and I think that's where a lot of this technology is going to lead. Where you can start having smart switches at the edge, redirecting power, as needed. And maybe and even I've seen like recently, people can use their Tesla, I think, to power their home. You all probably know more than I do about that, but like, if there's power outages, you can actually have your car keep your home powered, which is fascinating, really, really good. But yeah, like I say, I think it's ever evolving. I would say that, the power grid, I talked about companies doing stuff for 40, 50 years or whatever. The power grid is pretty much as ancient as it gets, right? They've been running their system, and it is very old, and it's been run the way that it has always been run in the past. And I just think, it is ripe for innovation, and there's going to be lots of new things that I haven't even thought of that are going to make the system run more and more efficiently.
That's great. I think, we are getting close to the top of the hour, Justin, but we're getting a couple of questions around platforms for the hardware and software, and different computer chips and devices used. So I think it's a really broad topic, but an important one, because I know that there are, platforms for enabling this. So folks who may be considering, either getting into this as a designer or for a business. So I guess just briefly, since again, it's a broad topic, if you have any comments around, different platforms for these different types of sensing devices and the machine learning and AIoT.
Sure. And some of this might actually slide into my final slide here about getting started as a business. But I will say, there are a number of different platforms that allow you to do rapid prototyping. And we use one called Particle. If you just take a look at particle.io, that's one of the ones that I think they have hardware at the edge that they actually have a SOM chip where you can put into anything that you need to get data from. And they handle a lot of the complexities with regards to how are you going to use a cellular network? You're going to use a Wi-Fi network. How do you do remote code deployment? That's one of these other big things that a lot of companies don't really think about. There's a cost to now pushing data models down to the edge or doing firmware, remote firmware updates. So I would say it could be Particle, but just look around for systems that are sort of already built for you out of the gate. Because what you don't want to do is especially in a lot of these cases, you actually don't understand the value of this quite yet. These are all, and as I'm starting to show here, I'm going to slide into this slide. But as you're starting to work on this, you actually have a hypothesis. You say, my customers think they need this. I think we need this. But let's actually dip our toe in the water, right? And so what I always say to people is stand something up that is already sort of half built if you can. And if you can connect the tubes and the wires together to sort of prove out a minimum viable product, that is the best place to start. And, you'll hear the names like, AWS, Google, Microsoft. Those are great platforms to start with. Excellent, because that's what they do is they basically provide you cloud APIs. And then at the edge, like I say, Particle is one that I would definitely take a look at to begin with. And there's all sorts of other ones from a company called Nordic. They actually have a whole sort of design platform that you can build. But I would say take it lightly. I also we do a lot of work with Arduino. It's basically an open source hardware platform, and you can buy boards for next to nothing. You can hook them up to your sensors, and you can start getting data pretty quickly. So
okay, no, that's great, Justin. I think it's a great transition. Why don't we get to your next slide?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, like I say, I'll touch a little bit about like with an MVP, but this is what I do. I sit down and talk with businesses. Let's forget about the technology for a second. Like, what would you like to capture from your products or features, to improve your customer experience, right? And so typically what I do is talk with somebody that's in the product team, and they're not even really related to the engineering team. And then we talk about which category, it fits in. Ultimately, it will fit in one of those 6 categories that I was talking about: asset tracking, compliance, automatic replenishment, environmental monitoring. Sometimes it's just consumer convenience. Sometimes our consumers are asking to be able to see, what's going on, even on their factory floor, for example, because they have no visibility into that today. And then ultimately, maybe there's some cost savings around preventative maintenance as well. But those are sort of the 6 categories that we talked through. Then let's assign an assumed value. So back to the question from somebody there, like, what is the value of this? We honestly don't really know. We're going to make an assumed value of this, but we can oftentimes calculate, well, geez, if only one person had to come to my house and service this thing instead of 3 times, like what would that cost be, right? What is the cost of less support calls, for example? Like if somebody goes out to actually service a thing and they haven't actually had to have multiple phone conversations with somebody, what does that cost, right? Obviously, if we have this data on the compliance side, so I talk about BSI, right? Now they have actually data saying, look, this person was out doing the de-icing at this facility at this time. What's the value in that? So you're going to make some assumptions. Sort of price out. Number 4 is sort of price out the cost, and then the cost to install a rapid prototype. And as I was getting back to before, like there are a number of different hardware devices you can find, from, like I say, Particle to cloud. And we really work with companies and figure out which one is the right one for them to build a rapid prototype. And then let's just iteratively build, measure, learn. There's this idea from a gentleman named Eric Ries called the Lean Startup. And we really sort of measure how we're doing, learn from it, and calculate the return on investment. And some of these, you're going to realize maybe there isn't value in it, right? Or not value today, or it's too expensive to deploy, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, the last thing you want to do is actually go super deep and spend a ton of money to begin with, proving out a hypothesis that maybe wasn't right to begin with, right? So yeah, I would say, sort of this is the journey that I walk businesses through. Let's start looking at what business problem we're trying to solve, and let's start, putting in some proof of concepts to understand where things are going. This is my last slide. I will encourage people, if you could, give me feedback. I have a QR code here. If you want to scan it with your camera or a QR code reader app, that will take you off to a website where you can sort of rate me as a speaker. It just really helps me. I try and do a lot of these talks, and I'm always trying to improve. So if you have a chance here, go ahead and click on this and give me feedback. My last slide is just my contact information, which I'll hop to here in a second after people give me feedback. But Ed, is there anything else that's come through? I think we've got about 5 minutes left, maybe.
Yeah, just a couple of questions to wrap it up. And I think it's almost like we have an organized audience. They're kind of grouping around a theme around safety and security. Are there any established certifications or around that? And then the topic around, bad actors and hacking, anything unique to IoT, and, just all of this becoming more important as humans are interacting with this technology.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that I think is interesting with just IoT and hacking is, now you have something that is physical out in the field that somebody could get to, right? And so, this idea that there is data being stored somewhere in a server farm somewhere in California, that's no longer true. Now you actually have a device that's out in the field that somebody could physically tamper with. And so those are things that I would worry about, that I think about with regards to somebody being able to physically gain access to the device and essentially either physically take the thing, or be able to plug something into it. And so there's a lot of things going on with regards to encryption and data being stored only in memory. And there's a lot of companies that have basically been spun up more recently where they never save anything to disk. They never save thing anywhere. So the moment this thing gets powered off, it's always just sort of stored in resident memory. So that is one thing that I would say is a very interesting area and a place where people are starting to put their sort of minds around with regards to, somebody can actually tamper proof with it. The other things that can happen is people can actually hack into these devices and actually essentially run like an infinite computational loop and then kill the battery on these. Right? I've heard of other things like that happening, where it's not really they're actually trying to access data, because there might be no data on this thing anyways, but they just try and they're more or less just being malicious in some ways, just to try and like shut down these devices. So those are things that you need to think about, whether it become like battery life, like I said, and actually just like some of the physical aspect to it. Certifications are interesting. There is definitely some AI alliances that are going on, and if you just search for IoT and artificial intelligence alliances, companies are coming together and trying to put together basically, here are the standard set of things that you should be doing. I would say 90% of them are just standard cybersecurity rules. Make sure your data is encrypted at rest, make sure you're using secure protocols all the way through. So, as long as you're doing a lot of those things, it's sort of like, okay, at least you're following some of the standard sets. But one thing I would caution is, some of these products coming out on Kickstarter, for example, are just people sort of putting together stuff very quickly. And sometimes security is the last thing to think about. So I worry a little bit about, I would buy products from a reputable company, a big name, a company that's going to be around for a while, because if somebody goes out of business, like what happened to all this stuff? And not so much like use anything that would be, off a Kickstarter program where I'm putting a lot of personal biometric information into that they could essentially be, utilizing in some way that I don't really know about. So that would be sort of like one of my cautionary tales around that. Probably go with something that's more reputable.
Yep. No, that's great. And I've seen the same thing. A lot of great consortiums and sort of design ethos around this and building security from the start. So great answer, Justin. Well, we're getting just a couple minutes left, so I want to wrap up. But we really appreciate your time. It's wonderful to have your insight and being able to take advantage during this pandemic time, having someone like yourself speak to us. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the offer. It's been fun.
And great, and a lot of great information. So Bert, I'll turn it back over to you just to close off.
Thanks so much, Ed. Justin, that was absolutely fascinating. So much great stuff in there. Thinking of different connections that we can make through all of this. So looking forward to that. We did record this, so we'll be posting this up on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and refer to that. For all of you who attended today, I'll send you a follow-up email with Justin's slides as well, so you'll have all that. And with that, just want to say thank you to everybody. Thanks, Ed, for moderating, and thank you all for attending and for the great questions. And we'll see you hopefully next month at our first Friday in December. Take care.